There's nothing more heart-melting than an animal duo that just doesn't make sense. This massive Belgian shepherd somehow adopted a tiny rescue owl, and what happened next was completely unexpected. One afternoon, the big dog let out a loud echoing howl. He was far from the house, but his voice carried. The whole family heard it and rushed out of their forest cabin. Charging toward them was their dog, and in his mouth was what looked like a small bundle of feathers. The family froze in place. When he got to them, the dog gently placed the feathery lump at their feet. Their hearts sank. It was hard to look. They loved that little owl deeply, and she wasn't moving. No one had thought Ingo would ever do something like this. They hesitated, unsure if they even wanted to check. What would they see? Ingo had always been one of the gentlest dogs they'd ever known. He'd formed a strong bond with that tiny owl. Something special and rare. That's why it was so hard to believe that this is how it ended. It looked like something had changed, like maybe his instincts had taken over and he'd hurt the one friend he was never supposed to. You wouldn't expect softness from a dog as big as Ingo. He looked tough, huge, focused, and incredibly smart. Ingo actually came from a long line of trained service dogs. He was meant to be a police dog, but things didn't go as planned. It wasn't that he wasn't smart. He was brilliant. He could complete any challenge, navigate obstacle courses, even open doors on command. But when it came to taking down a suspect, he wouldn't bite. They'd shout the signal, and he'd just gently grab the person's sleeve. In real life, that kind of reaction wouldn't stop anyone. In fact, it might have put Ingo in danger. No matter how much they trained him, he never wanted to hurt anyone. He just wasn't made for that kind of work. Eventually, it became clear he didn't belong in that role. So, they let him go, and he was put up for adoption. That's how he ended up in the home of Tanya Brandt. Tanya adored him from the start, and Ingo clearly felt the same about her. Tanya was a wildlife photographer, and often hiked into the woods with her camera. Ingo was the perfect companion. Obedient, sharp, and calm. He stayed when told, came when called, and made her life easier in every way. He was not just a part of the family, but also part of her work. Their home was deep in the forest with a big wooden cabin and plenty of fenced land. Ingo had space to roam, chase, and burn off energy. He needed it too. This dog had energy for days. But with all that space, he stayed calm and focused when it came time to work. He'd quietly wait beside her while she snapped photos of wildlife. He never disturbed the animals. One time, a squirrel helped itself to the kibble in his bowl, and he didn't even move. He just watched. That's the kind of dog Ingo was, but things changed one afternoon. Tanya had been keeping an eye on a few owl nests nearby. These owls were small and adorable, perfect for photos. She had noticed that one of the nests had several eggs in it and was excited to return often and watch their progress. Each day, she and Ingo would check the nest with her long lens. They kept a respectful distance. When the eggs finally hatched, Tanya was thrilled. The nest was full of baby owls, and she got straight to photographing them. Ingo, though, wasn't acting like himself. Instead of lying down and waiting, he became restless. He sniffed around the bushes under the tree and let out soft, nervous whines. Tanya tried to get him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. Not this time. He wasn't focused on the owls in the nest. He had found something. Tanya finally followed him and looked where he was sniffing. That's when she saw it. Owl egg had fallen from the nest and lay hidden in the brush. They had no idea how it got there. Maybe the owls kicked it out. Maybe it fell. Either way, it was alone and cold. Climbing up to return it wasn't an option. She might scare the mother away from her babies. Tanya wasn't sure what to do. Maybe the egg wasn't viable. But even so, she couldn't just walk away without trying. Ingo stood beside her, watching, waiting. He seemed to expect her to do something, so they tried. Back at home, they threw together a small incubator using light bulbs and a glass box. No one thought it would actually work, but Ingo stayed right there, keeping his eyes on the egg. He was fully invested. A few days later, in the middle of the night, Ingo began to bark, not loud and frantic, but short and excited. Something was happening. The big dog was over the moon with excitement. None of them could believe the egg was actually hatching. They all watched in awe as the little owl pushed her way out of the shell. They named her Py and prayed she would make. Thankfully, they had already read up on how to care for a baby owl. They hadn't expected to use that info, but now they were glad they had it. They fed her carefully and kept her warm. Ingo never left their side. The tiny owl got used to having the giant dog nearby, and once her feathers started growing in, the two were inseparable. She'd run to Ingo, jump on him, and curl up on his head to nap. Py couldn't fly yet, but she'd chase Ingo all around the house. She became more attached to the dog than to the humans, which was both sweet and to Tanya and her family, it looked like Py saw Ingo as her parent. Somehow, the big dog had adopted the tiny owl. Was the most amazing thing they'd ever witnessed. Tanya captured the bond in some unforgettable photos, and when Py finally took her first flight, she flew straight toward Ingo. They began teaching her to hunt by hiding food for her, and she started flying out and returning. One time she even caught a mouse, brought it back, and ate it while sitting on Ingo's back. She was growing strong and learning fast. That's when the family knew Py could take care of herself now. She deserved the chance to live wild and free. So they loaded up the car, drove far into the forest, and let her go. Ingo rested his head on the seat the whole way home, looking heartbroken. The family felt it too, but they knew it was the right thing. Letting her go was the kindest choice for a wild bird. But the sadness didn't last long. When they opened their front door, an owl came swooping in from above and landed right on Ingo. It was Py. Had beaten them home. The owl clearly had no plans to leave her family forever. She wanted freedom to fly, yes, but she also wanted to stay close. So they built a few owl boxes around their land to give her space while still letting her stick around. Py picked one of the boxes to live in, but she didn't stay away for long. Every time they opened the door, she'd be there again, napping on Ingo or running around the yard with him. That's why it felt strange when she suddenly disappeared. For a few days, everyone noticed, especially Ingo. He was restless and anxious. Then one day, he bolted into The woods at the edge of the property. The land was fenced, but big, so he had room to run. They heard his howl echo from the trees. It sounded different, almost like he was hurting. Tanya and her family rushed outside. Just before they could go searching, Ingo came running back. And he wasn't alone. In his mouth was a familiar bundle of feathers. He laid it down gently at their feet. They froze. It was Py, but she wasn't moving. Shock hit them all at once. Had Ingo he hurt her? No one wanted to believe it, but the scene was terrifying. Then Ingo leaned down and gave her a soft lick. Py stirred. He was alive. The relief was overwhelming. They gently picked her up. There were no bite marks, no wounds from teeth, nothing that pointed to Ingo. But she was hurt. Her wing was broken, and she was sick and weak. Clearly, Ingo had found her in a bad state and carried her home as carefully as he could. He hadn't harmed her. He had rescued her from the very beginning. Even as an egg, Ingo had been her guardian. Now he had saved her. Once more. They didn't know if she would pull through, but they had to try. They wrapped her wing and tried feeding her. But she wasn't eating. They gave her special tonics and birds safe antibiotics and let her rest. They placed her in a small cage so she couldn't try to fly and make her injury worse. Ingo stayed close. He lay beside the cage with his head pressed against. Py sat as near as she could to him. Ingo gave her gentle licks and fell asleep with his head next to hers. The next morning, she opened her eyes and let out a familiar little sound, the same one she used when she wanted food. It made their hearts swell. She was hungry again. That was a good sign. They let her walk around indoors, giving her time to heal. At first, she was still so fragile, but slowly she got stronger. She began fluttering her wings again. When the time came, they loosened the wrap and tested her flight. She could do. Not long after, they released her. Once more. Py was free again. They let her go, and she returned to the owl boxes. But if she had been clingy before, now she barely left their yard. They still didn't know what had caused her injury. But whatever it was, it seemed to make her more cautious, at least when it came to the wild. At home, though, she was as confident as ever. And the bond between the dog and the owl grew even stronger. But things were about to change again. This time, forever. The giant Belgian shepherd had adopted this tiny owl, and somehow the story wasn't over yet. After everything they'd been through, something even sweeter was waiting ahead. Py had truly made the owl boxes her home. She felt safe and she was still free. And it was in that safety that something incredible happened. She decided to start her own family. The family was stunned the day they saw eggs in her nest. That's exactly how this whole story had started. Py had come into their lives as an egg. Now she was laying eggs of her. It felt like things had come full circle. And without Ingo, none of it would have happened. Py, her babies, and even their babies would never have had a chance if it weren't for one smart, gentle dog who cared deeply. Now, the family had the chance to watch over her eggs, just like before. The excitement was unreal. When the owlets began flying, the very first place their mother brought them was back home. One morning, Tanya walked outside. and saw Ingo completely covered in owls. The little ones had followed Py and were now snuggling up to her best friend. From that day forward, Py and all her babies made the family's land there. They added more owl boxes, and soon the owls built nests in them. Most of them grew up and moved on, flying free. They trusted the family, but none of them bonded quite like Pi did. Pi got older, and her bond with Ingo never faded. Even when she passed, it didn't end in Ingo's love for the owls. One of PD's granddaughters, a little owl named Bleach, was sick and weak. She had trouble flying and was pushed out of the nest. Tanya spotted her, and just like with Pi, she and Ingo stepped in to care for her. Bleach couldn't be released, but she had a home with the family. They built a special owl box at just the right height, and she lived as freely as she could. She even found a mate and laid eggs. Sadly, most of the eggs never hatched. Bleach laid 17 eggs in total, but only one from her very last clutch hatched. Still, that one baby survived, grew strong, and one day flew off into the forest to live free. Ingo loved Bleach just as much as he had loved Pi, and now the family of owls knew that no matter what happened, they would always have a home, love, and protection thanks to one big-hearted dog, and the people who cared for them all. What unusual animal friendships do you love most? If this story touched your heart, give it a like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories just like